welcome to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And as usual, I'm your host, Sam Mickey. And this week I'm really excited to welcome onto the show Barbara Mahany. Barbara, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, dear Sam.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. For people who don't know you, you have a very interesting biography. You were a former pediatric oncology nurse, and then you transitioned to a career of about 3 decades as a reporter and writer at the Chicago Tribune. And then since then, now you're a freelance journalist, an essayist, a collector of stories, and the author of 5 books, and the latest of which is The Book of Nature, The Astonishing Beauty of God's First Sacred Text, which is out with Broadleaf Books with the very auspicious publication date of the first day of spring. So really happy to chat with you about it. But first, I'm always curious about people's biography, and especially about how religion and ecology come together for you, because this book is definitely a book about nature, but it's a book about spirituality. Of course, for some people, those are just like, oil and water, they don't mix. And nature is seen as a science thing, and religion is seen as kind of otherworldly. It's about heaven, it's about God, the soul, not about nature. So I wonder, how did those come together in your life?
Great question. So I've always been a really spiritual person. I was raised a Roman Catholic. I was raised by wonderful. I was just post-Vatican II Roman Catholic, raised by liberal Sisters of Loretto. I remember the year of my first communion was just post-Vatican II. And so I thought that they had turned the altar around and started speaking in English just for my class of first communicants. So I had these wonderful nuns who were among the first to, change their names back to their original names, ripped off their habits, were, smoking cigarettes behind the convent, strumming their guitars, teaching us Kumbaya, showing us the Red Balloon film for religion class. And I had very devout parents. And so I just grew up a deeply spiritual person. I've always been really curious about other religions. I also grew up with a mother I have called the original Mother Nature. Classic story from my growing up years. So there were five kids in my family, and my mom would be taking home movies of the kids and in our backyard. And all of a sudden there would be a scarlet tanager or an indigo bunting in the trees, above us. And her little home camera would quickly shift from her 5 little chiclets to, whatever was fluttering in the trees. And we just got used to it. Like, that's how mom is. And so I grew up, there was a woods across the street and a creek that I splashed in and chased crawdads in. So the two have just always been really, really strong pulse beats inside me. I married, when I was a reporter at the Tribune, there was this new guy who came into the newsroom a few years after I'd been there. And he was this tall, bespectacled Jewish fellow. I knew him to be Jewish. I knew that he was Jewish. And I also noticed, which was really unusual, in a newsroom on Friday evenings when the Sunday paper is getting put together and nobody leaves the newsroom because the Sunday paper is the gold star of the newspaper for the week. This tall, bespectacled fellow would leave the newsroom at about 6 o'clock to go to synagogue. And I was like, wow, I'm impressed. This guy takes his religion seriously. Only to find out a couple years later, that he was leaving the newsroom at 6 o'clock because that was when his synagogue had their singles service. And he had just moved to Chicago from Des Moines Register, hoping to meet a nice Jewish girl. And he had to leave the newsroom to do that. So anyway, I'd always been really fascinated. I grew up with lots and lots of Jewish kids. When I was a freshman in high school, I asked a friend of mine if her family would please have a Seder and invite me, because I was really curious about a Passover Seder. So anyway, I ended up, the tall bespectacled fellow and I dated for several years, and a major conversation we had was, we were both serious about our religions and how are we going to do this? How would we, have kids and raise them? What would we do? It turns out Chicago's long been at the forefront of Jewish Catholic relations. So there was this group of Jewish and Catholic couples who had originally started a group as, they were dating, and then they were engaged and marrying. And then when they had children, they formed something called the family school, which teaches both Judaism and Catholicism, isn't trying to create a third religion, very distinctly looking for the common threads, but also, clearly stating their distinctions. So we had gone to talk to several priests and rabbis, and one of the priests, finally said, listen, it's the same God, it's just a different language, just follow your bliss. So we got married and made the decision that we would be a family of two religions, and we would raise our children in both. And from the beginning, I embraced Judaism. I love Judaism. And Judaism, I realized very early on, is religion that pays attention to all of creation. You light the candles 18 minutes before sundown on Shabbat. And at the end of Shabbat, Havdalah, you wait until you see 3 medium-sized stars in the heavens before you begin, the blessings that end Shabbat, the Havdalah blessings. So just in so many of the Jewish prayers and text and poetries, there was just this resonance with creation and with Creator. And it just spoke to me in a really, really deep way. But literally, the moment I tied religion and creation, nature together was after my first book came out. My first book is called Slowing Time, Seeing the Sacred Outside Your Kitchen Door. I was on a podcast with a rabbi, Rami Shapiro, who had written most of the prayers in our synagogue's prayer book. So I was not only familiar with him, but loved his soulfulness. So somehow I ended up on his, I don't even know if it was a podcast. I think at the time it was just a radio show. I think it was before podcasts. And it's called How to Be a Holy Rascal. So I was talking to him about my first book, and he just said in this offhanded way, he said, Slowing Time reads like Midrash to the Book of Nature. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool for an Irish Catholic to be pinned with Midrash. That doesn't happen every day. Midrash, of course, is rabbinic commentary. And I was like, well, rabbinic commentary, me? But I was even more struck by the Book of Nature. And as I write in my eventual Book of Nature, I could tell the way he said it, that this was like, this was capital B, capital N. And I was like, wait a minute, how could I have been a fairly spiritual person my whole life, a fairly nature-ish person my whole life, and not know of this Book of Nature? So, I got off the podcast or the interview, whatever it was, and I did what people do these days when they're curious. I Googled it really fast. I'm like, Book of Nature. And I just, it just opened this still endless curiosity for me. And I just started reading, and I discovered, the presence of this ancient theology that saw all of creation as, God's first revelation to all of us, and this place of incredible encounter. And I felt that encounter my whole life. I felt some of the most sacred moments of my life were, on my knees in the garden, or out in the woods, or under the star-stitched sky. But I didn't know this theological construct was twinned with all of that. So the discovery that this Book of Nature idea existed just pinned it together for me something I had experienced my whole life,
Yeah.
and it put this, this framework on it. And once I knew of it, I just have this eternal feeling of, that every time I step outdoors, I'm stepping into the pages of this sacred prayer book.
Right. That's wonderful. Yeah, and I think the Book of Nature is kind of one of the best kept secrets of the Abrahamic traditions. So there's often this idea that, oh no, those religions are very human centered, and it's really just about the human relationship to other people and to God and creation. It's in the background. It's
Right,
working fine on its own. We don't have
right,
to pay attention to it. If you're going to read scripture, read the Bible.
right,
And there's no sense of like, oh, shouldn't I be reading the signs of nature too? It's like, oh, no, no, just the Bible. And then when you look
right.
at the tradition, like, oh no, there's all this attention to creation.
Right. And all these people are paying it. That what I love is, it's Eastern religions and Western religions and transcendentalists and believers and maybe not so believers have all been reading and seeing the sacred in in the book of nature, in this nature that surrounds us. And I feel, especially now, in this age we live in which words have become cudgels in so many
Right.
parts of our lives, and we've broken ourselves down into all these balkanized groups, that it's this wordless universalist text that needs no translation. You feel it with your whole body. You feel it when the goosebumps break out on the back of your neck and up and down your arms, and it's a beautiful thing to feel as if you've been brushed by
Mhm.
the divine in the
Mhm.
quietest of beauties and wonders and rattlings sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the things I really appreciate about the book is that that feeling comes through so palpably. And it's easy to talk about the Book of Nature and then get stuck in ancient and medieval theology, and it could easily become this just kind of dry academic kind of scholarly thing. And that's good for dry academics. We need those people doing that work. But there's something so special about the way you're able to bring that to life. And so it really just jumps off of the page. And
You know,
yeah, go on.
I was going to say I would credit my editor with that,
Hmm.
because I was just all entranced with this whole story and this whole history, and um wanted to write a chapter about the spiritual practice of paying exquisite attention, and a chapter about stillness that ended up on the cutting room floor. But
Hmm.
my editor said, not only do I want you to tell us about the book of nature, I want you to experience it. I want
Hmm.
you to take pages from your own book of nature, the most resonant pages from your book of nature, and take us into those moments and places. And so, I ended up, the architecture of the book is such that, the first few chapters are exploring this whole idea and this notion of paying a particular kind of attention.
Yeah.
Because as I say in the book, the God in nature, isn't like, most of the time, isn't banging us over the head.
Right.
It's this hide and seek sort of, you have to pay attention. You have to quiet yourself, and you have to await the encounter. Um, but then the second half of the book, I divided into the earthly, the liminal, and the heavenly. And I picked, from my garden, from, just exploring the lessons I've learned in my garden, the sacred I've felt there. My garden, the woods, the water's edge, dawn, dusk, um, stars and moons, all of it, the birds. And I also made the point, I live in the Midwest. I'm in Chicago. I'm in about, 10 minutes away from Lake Michigan's
Hmm.
shoreline. And there's no mountains here. There's nothing dramatic.
Right.
We don't have, you're on the Pacific coast. I don't have a Pacific coast. I have a Great Lakes shoreline. But so I wanted to make the point, and I nod to Annie Dillard and to Thoreau, who both, Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, I thought,
Yeah.
man, she's living in a hermitage in the woods and in some spectacular place. She lived in, a tract house in the
Right.
suburbs, in a subdivision,
Yeah.
and she had this little creek that was her Pilgrim Creek. But she teaches us to see, to plumb the depths of that and to look for every little scintilla of wonder. I'll never forget her scene with the water bug and the frog. Like, I mean, she's got so many scenes in there that are just like, emblazoned in my memory. And Thoreau's Walden Pond was 18-minute walk from his mother's house.
Yeah.
I think he probably went home to do the laundry or have her do the laundry. Who knows?
Right.
But, and my editor had originally said something about, like, well, you'll travel to the mountains and to the desert. And I could have gone to those places, but I just thought it was really important to make the point that even in my quotidian geography, where, honestly, it is some sort of sanitary canal that's down the street that's surrounded by woods that I can just pretend is like a river. I don't need to pay attention to the fact that it's really controlling the flow of dreck in and out of Lake Michigan. And plenty of people live in big cities, and their closest encounter with the nature might be sitting on their fire escape and looking up at a starry night. I mean, you're in San Francisco. I'm sure you have access to plenty of natural beauties, but sometimes it's, the urban grid.
Yeah.
So I thought it was, important to not travel to exotic places and to just make the point that wherever you are, you can find it.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important. Yeah, so many people wouldn't have the means to go travel to exotic places. And they're like, well,
Right.
if it's only for people who have, that kind of wealth and privilege to be able to do that, then, what's the message here, really? And
Right.
instead, it's like, oh no, you can open the book of nature anywhere. And
Right.
even just feeling, the wind on your skin or the sunshine on your shoulders. And, that's like, oh, right, I'm connected to this bigger thing. Yeah, I think
Right.
that's so important. It's definitely something, the students that I work with at the University of San Francisco always emphasizing that. It's like they can't always get to like the ocean or one of the big parks we have. And so I'm like, well, you can find it anywhere. And even just paying attention to birds and bugs, like
Yeah.
stuff's around. And when you can learn to connect with it, it can really transform you. I guess this is, a really big part of, like you said in the intro to the book, is really describing this art of paying attention. That attention isn't what we think it is. There's really more there than we realize, but you like have to train yourself.
Right. 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 Absolutely. I mean, I often talk about just, you can just press your nose to the window pane and watch a storm coming in, watching a storm come in, or at this very moment, there's snow falling on my pretend daffodils out the window. It just comes at you. I mean, rain, you can hear a rain, and I would imagine in most places you can hear the percussions of, the pitter patter of a rainfall, or the percussions of thunders and lightnings. If you can catch a glimpse of sky, if you can catch a glimpse of sunrise or sunset, it can do it for you.
Yeah, right. The more you do it, the easier it gets too. And because I've had, students who are kind of new to this idea, and then they're like, I don't know, I'm not going to fall in love with like the sky. And I'm like, yeah, I thought that at a certain point too. And then you do it long enough, and it just, even just looking at the sunset, and your heart will just open in surprising ways. So yeah, I appreciate the way you emphasize attention first. Like, all right, once you learn to pay attention, then you
Right.
can read this book.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I also make the point in the book that it's so important to I mean, my book had sort of a sub theme of reading. I read 200 books before I sat down to start writing this book. And I've likened that to, as a journalist, if you're going to go tell a story, you have to, find the best sources and interview these, people who have far deeper and broader understandings of a subject than you ever would, or are, firsthand witnesses to, events. And so for me, I realized that reading those 200 books was something of a journalistic practice, in that, those 200 thinkers and poets and mystics and naturalists who I read became my journalistic sources. And for everyone, I think one of the ways we learn to pay attention, one of the ways we learn to see, is to, mine our bookshelves and mine the libraries and find those great minds and great literary souls who over the centuries have been seeing the beauties and the wonders in all of creation. And in reading them, I found that I began to see more closely, more, a finer grain. They became my teachers in seeing. And so, for anyone who might be inclined, or might, their appetite might be whetted to see what's out there in the natural world, populating your bookshelves with the great poets and writers. And in this book, I have this, at the end of the book, I have this really, really long bibliography. And I have, I called it the bookshelf of wonder, in which, I kind of give, I point people towards some of the writers whose works I think might most open their eyes and point them toward a deeper level of seeing.
Yeah, that's such a valuable resource. It's like worth the price of admission by itself. Is this amazing bibliography and then the bookshelf of wonder? Because sometimes a book will have an amazing bibliography, but it's just the entries. And you're like, okay, well, which ones are the really important ones to you? And could you say a little bit about them? And so then in that bookshelf of wonder, you do that. You kind of select some of the greatest hits and you say a little bit about each one. So yeah, I think that's such a valuable inroad for people. Like, okay, well, how do I learn how to read the book of nature? Like, well, maybe listen to some of these people and they'll help you. Like Annie Dillard's such a good example. Like, well, if you want to pay attention to the little things and find wild nature everywhere, well, here's Annie Dillard for you. So I wonder a little bit, if you have a Catholic background and then Judaism shows up in the mix, how did you get such an expansive view of the book of nature? Because you don't stay just within Catholicism, Judaism, like you're saying. It's East, it's West, it's indigenous, there's poets, there's scientists, there's philosophers.
I mean, I think that's the magnificence of it. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's everyone's. And, I liken it to, just turning a kaleidoscope or turning a prism, and from every new angle, you see something new and beautiful. And at the same time, there's this sort of magnification. When I see that Basho, the Japanese poet, when I read his poetries and see what he sees, and then I go read Rumi and I see how, a long, long time ago, Rumi was seeing these beauties that, Thoreau and Emerson were seeing centuries after that. It's just, to me, it just underscores the truth of it all. And I mean, the more voices I listen to, the richer I feel. It's just, just this symphony of wonders. And, listening to the indigenous beliefs and myths and stories, all of it all of it. I mean, I feel more and more I'm becoming, just an avowed ecumenicist.
Yeah.
I they're all paths toward the sacred, and any path toward the sacred is a path that I would rejoicingly leap into.
Yeah, yeah, beautifully said. It's such a, problem in the history of religions that religions often fight with one another.
Right.
And then one of the things I really appreciate about the kind of diverse and capacious view you have is that nature can be the common ground for religions. Like, well, we all have Earth, we all have the cosmos above us, and so that can be our literal common ground. And
Exactly.
and so then, seemingly with, a kind of effortlessness, all of these voices just come together in harmony around the book of nature. So yeah,
Exactly.
I think that's just such important work for our time. Because if we can bring harmony between religions, then you're bringing harmony between humankind.
Amen. 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 And especially, I think, in the realm of Judaism,
Hmm.
there's been this debate for the last, I don't know, maybe around the time my husband Blair and I were getting married. The big debate was like Christmas tree versus Hanukkah bush. And it's so, to me, it has become, that's such a surface level discussion. I'm not interested, in interfaith conversation that just stays at that superficial level. I just feel it's really important to, for me as I'm a non-Jew, and to to mine the text. I do Torah study on Saturday mornings now, and I'm always in conversation with my rabbis to mine the text and to draw out these beautiful, beautiful understandings and hold them to the light. For instance, I write about this Jewish the celebration, the honoring of the new moon of each month. And
Mhm.
there's these beautiful rituals that I didn't know about, where people go out, they leave the synagogue and they go stand outside and they, face the moon, and they have these gorgeous Hebrew prayers, and rise up on their toes, and sometimes they beat each other on their shoulders, and there's so much beautiful ritual. And I think it's really important for someone who's not Jewish to say, see the beauty here. I mean, I've talked to some of my Jewish friends about some of the things I learned and discovered, and they've commented that those were beauties that they hadn't known of.
Mm.
So I just think it's important to not just forge unions at the surface levels, but to really hold up each other's traditions and understandings, and see the beauty and share the beauty and honor the beauty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really is remarkable how much our own traditions are hidden from us. And people
Right.
forget about all these things, and they've like lost the moon and the earth and things like that. It's like, no, that's in your tradition. People are like, what, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go check that out again. So yeah, I think that's interfaith work at its best, when we're actually kind of recovering some depths of our traditions and being able to share those with one another. And so fascinated by the possibility of then parenting in a way where your children, you're raising like this new type of person who's able
Yeah.
to have kind of like dual citizenship. It's like,
Right.
no, I'm part of both worlds, and you don't necessarily have to choose.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting whole other conversation. It's we embraced it emphatically, and the truth is, it depends on the child and the child's particular intellectual life. For one of our sons, who just recognized early on this serious cognitive dissonance here. He's like, wait, Mom, Dad says Jesus is a rabbi. We were just at Easter Mass and they're telling us, and he was like 10, and he literally said, Mom, there's cognitive dissonance.
That's great.
That kid has gone on, he's a brand new law professor. And so
Oh, nice.
he always had a pretty inquisitive mind. At one point, the poor kid, we were doing just the family school was our original only religious education, and I think it was like either kindergarten or first grade curriculum. We were driving home from one of our Sunday mornings, and he was sitting in the back seat, as arms practically crossed, as was his way, and he's like, Mom, it's just like glorified art class. I want something more. So the poor kid, we signed him up, of course, kept him in, family school's dual education process, but we also signed him up for Catholic CCD and Hebrew school at the synagogue in Hyde Park.
Wow.
So I think one of his college essays was about this, the Sunday morning adventure of he would, go to family school at there's a big, wonderful Catholic church downtown called Old St. Pat's. And so that's where the family school would meet. And then he would go over to his CCD class. And then there was about 20 minutes between the end of CCD and the start of Hebrew school down at, a synagogue in Hyde Park at the University of Chicago. And so, his father would be racing him down the Dan Ryan Expressway in the station wagon to get from one religion to the next. And he talked about, he would, kind of half raise his hand in some of the classes, and he always felt like he didn't know as much as the natural born kids in the classes. So it's a somewhat bumpy path, but
yeah, but nice to see somebody experimenting with that in real life, because otherwise it's just one of these things that scholars and theologians will kind of talk about, like, well, how do we deal with comparing different views of Jesus across these different traditions? Like, well, at a certain point, you need to just try it out and see what works.
Yeah.
And
I mean, both of them had, first communion and bar mitzvahs, believe it or not. Believe it or not.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me.
Yeah, it was an interesting adventure. But, in our family, every Friday night, we light the candles, and Shabbat begins at our house at sundown, and it's beautiful, and it's somewhat countercultural in this age of constant plugged inness to, I have yet to truly honor a Shabbat and, completely unplug, but I long to do that. I long to do that, to really, just step away from the worldliness and really, Shabbat is about honoring creation. And on the seventh day, God rested. And so we should all be resting.
That is such a powerful gesture, to just take some time off. And it's a society that's always telling us to be more productive and do more. Like, well, that I think that's causing some problems, like environmental problems, mental health issues. It's a struggle for everybody. And then you look back at these traditions, and they're like, oh, we have this thing where once a week you relax.
We've had it forever.
And you're like, oh, what do I have to do? Nothing. It's very easy in a way.
Do nothing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like whenever we can respond to serious environmental issues in a way where we get to relax. Like, that seems like a win-win. It's good for the earth. It's good for us.
Right. You just made me think of one other, and I know this is secondhand to everyone at the Forum on Religion and Ecology. It's what you breathe. But I think, one of the points I make in the book that I think is so important, for lay reader people to understand is when you understand that all of creation is sort of this dwelling place of God, I think it just propels this urgency. It injects this urgency, and you begin to understand that it is an imperative that we not let the forest burn, that we not bulldoze a meadow, that, it's not just pretty, and we're not just, you know, losing the woods. We are stripping away one of the most powerful avenues of encounter with the divine.
Yeah.
And to do that would be crushing. We might as well cut our souls out.
Yeah.
And I just think that grasping that and grasping it fully is really an important part of getting to work in terms of
Yeah.
doing what we need to do to protect this holy, precious earth and heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, otherwise it's, caring about environmental issues is always like, oh, there's this thing out there called nature that has some problems and we need to deal with it. It's like, no, this is our own soul. This is our own spirituality. This is, God's first sacred text.
Yeah,
So this is actually a lot more about us than we realize. Like, this isn't just about something out there called the environment. This is about
exactly.
our own spirituality and our own fulfillment. And that it's not just work, it's also joy and celebration. And then it
Right.
doesn't just seem like, oh great, we have to go clean up a stream or something. It's like, no, but it's astonishment. I like, one of the things in the book is the litanies that you
Yeah.
have. You have a litany of astonishments, for the earthly, the liminal, the heavenly. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, because I love that phrase, first of all.
Well, I mean, I'm one of those people, when there grew this schism between, like, the rational scientific world and the religious spiritual world. I'm one of those people, you mentioned that I was a pediatric oncology nurse. So if, to become a nurse, at least to become a nurse at a Jesuit university, you are taking a whole lot of science classes and a whole lot of religion and philosophy as well. But I'm one of those people who the more I peel back and understand the science at play beneath, whatever is the natural phenomenon, the more flabbergasted I get, the more astonished I get. And so I've long been, that litany of astonishments is a list in my computer that I've been saving for, a couple decades. Because, when you find out, I'm just thinking of one off the top of my head. When you find out that there's this particular bird whose beak over time has evolved so that it can perfectly fit in the particular kind of pine cone from which it draws its sustenance. And it's only this one species of bird, and it's only this one species of pine cone. And when you see, so it's all these revealing, like, the secret formulas and the mysteries of creation. The more I know about that stuff, the more I think, okay, wait, there had to be a great intelligence. There had to be a divine intelligence who masterminded all this stuff, because otherwise, how could it be? How could it
Yeah.
be?
Yeah. Like, what is the creativity that brought forth this kind of world?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of it. So that litany of astonishments, I can't remember how many I have on each one. Maybe it's a dozen, or maybe it's half a dozen. I don't remember. But I could spend the rest of my life just like, are you kidding me? I mean, I can't think of a whole lot of them off the top of my head right now. But, when you find these symmetries and these parallels and these, the ecosystems, and everybody's keeping everybody alive, and the fat juicy caterpillars just happen to come out at the exact time the baby birds need to be fed, and the baby birds are literally memorizing the constellations in the night sky,
Right.
so they can migrate. And, like, there's this one species of bird that makes its first migration on its own. The mama and the papa bird head off, and they leave this little guy alone, and then he's gonna find his way, and he does. Or the monarchs who migrate to the same tree
Right.
in Mexico, generation after generation. Somebody tell me how that's happening. If not, if not for a divine intelligence.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
so yeah, I'm weaving all kinds of things. I'm a weaver.
Yeah.
There's science, there's literature, there's astonishment, there's wonder, there's theology.
Yeah, and that's the forum on religion ecology in a nutshell. It's all about that kind of weaving. Like, well, we got to bring all these voices together. And so, yeah, such a treat to learn about your book. So I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly the kind of writing that just something jumps off the page about like the creativity of the natural world and the commonality of all of our human perspectives. And so it's just very, very enlivening. And then it kind of makes makes it exciting to have to repair the earth at a time of such difficulty. You go, oh
Mm-hmm.
wait, this is like doing the Lord's work. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's something very enlivening about it, which I really appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I wonder, do you have any new projects that you're working on? Obviously, you're going
Um,
to be talking about the Book of Nature for a while, but I'm always curious to hear like what might be next for people.
I I don't know what's next yet. I mean, I still am. There's so much deeper to go. I was looking this morning at the the various forums, the various conferences, the 10 conferences from all the different world religions
Right.
that were held early on at the beginning of the Forum on Religion and Ecology. And I thought, oh my God, to have a depth of knowledge on, I feel like I'm just beginning to scratch the surface. And the deeper I get, the deeper my understanding of Hinduism's perspective on creation and just on and on and on. There's so much more to learn. I don't know yet what's next, but I often don't know what's next, and then it just
Yeah.
appears in epiphany. There we go.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
There
That's
we
part
go.
of the paying attention to the Book of Nature. It's just like, well, we'll just kind of read the signs, just keep paying attention.
See where we go.
And yeah, and I think you quote Simone Weil on one of those things that like attention in its purest form is prayer.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful sentiment.
yeah. I'm really enchanted by prayer, interested. I love fixed hour prayer.
Mm.
I love, yeah, it will be something in the realm of the spiritual, but I don't know yet what.
Nice. Yeah,
But
that's good. Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel. I never know what's next. It's like, well, every time you learn more about something, you're just like, oh, there's this whole world here. And the deeper, it's like the more you know, the larger this horizon of the unknown shows up. Like the more you know about the shore, the greater you see the
yeah,
ocean of the unknown before you.
exactly. Am I allowed to ask? Like, tell me a little bit about you and how did you? I'm used to being the interviewer, not the interviewee. So,
Right.
how did these come together for you? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's similar to a lot of people. It's early childhood things where it's like, wow, these were just around. And so I was raised Catholic, but
Mhm.
also fishing and camping and hiking and stuff like that. And so I had, parents who were taking me out before I was really conscious. So yeah, I see pictures of me camping in like a tent, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I was self-aware yet. It was like 3 or something. So yeah, it
Where
was
did you
just
grow
kind of
up?
around. I
Where
was
did you grow up?
born
What
in
part of the country?
Arizona, so some Arizona stuff. Like we'd go up into the Rockies a little bit,
Mhm.
and then moved to Texas and grew up in Texas. So a lot of that's more time for hunting and fishing, but also taking some vacations, going into like the Black Hills of South Dakota. That was a family favorite. But staying in the United States, nothing too exotic. And then I liked philosophy a lot. Happened to go to the University of North Texas to get my undergraduate degree in philosophy, and I didn't know it at the time, but their specialty was environmental philosophy.
Oh.
And so then every class kind of had that tucked in it. So even a
Mhm.
class was just like the history of philosophy. They'd be like, we're going to talk about philosophy of nature a lot. And so then I had a lot of trouble separating philosophy, religion, and environment. Those all kind of stuck together for me. So
Uh-huh.
then I pursued graduate studies and got my PhD, and it was always kind of along those lines. And
Mhm.
then I've been teaching at the University of San Francisco for geez, about 15 years now,
Whoa.
and doing a lot of environmental ethics, religion, ecology, that kind of stuff, climate change. But yeah, always working between those worlds, the
Wow.
philosophy and spiritual stuff, environmental
Mm.
stuff. And yeah, doing it that long and having, doing doctoral work in it. And I'm still like, oh, I don't know what's going
Wow. So what
on.
departments do you teach in?
In the environmental studies program and the theology and religious studies department. So kind of do a little for both.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I discovered, the Yale Forum on religion and ecology, I was like, these are my people.
Yeah,
These are totally my people. And they
that's what
know
happened to
way
me.
more than I know, so I need to listen to them.
Yeah,
So,
it's a great community because it is like people will kind of find this hub and they're like, oh, what's going on here? And it's even though there's a lot of scholarly work going on, it's has a lot of heart. And there's a lot of a sense of community and cooperation, collaboration. A lot of people just sharing their joy while
mm,
also sharing the suffering. Because of
mhm,
course we're going through an unprecedented crisis,
yeah.
and yet there's still so much ground for hope and for love. And so, yeah, it's a great organization and
Wow.
a lot of great people out there doing good work, including yourself. It's one of those things you're like, hey, forum, what are you
I,
guys doing? And we're like, oh, yeah, get over here. This is fantastic. And so, yeah, that's, it's like the great work of our time. And there's so many people who are contributing different threads to this amazing
mhm,
tapestry.
absolutely. Absolutely. So when you were a kid, did you sometimes feel those goosebumps on the back of your neck? And did you sometimes sense there is God here?
Yeah, definitely. I remember thinking that at a pretty young age, that whatever we call life isn't that different than what we call God.
Mm-hmm.
And then not knowing even what those words mean, but
Mm-hmm.
but having some kind of sense of it.
Yeah.
And something about that curiosity just kept compelling me to study more. And so still to this day, I just have a pretty strong thirst to understand it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what
Yeah.
what
It's
is
endless.
going on? Even the
Yeah.
fact, like you're talking about the evolution of, a bird beak is a good example. I'm like, how is that? Life
Yeah.
is evolving, and then you learn the universe is evolving. Like you're telling me this whole thing started with a big bang, and then like that turned into us. I just can't wrap my head around that, and I can't stop trying to understand.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's part of the joy of the work. I think it's such an important part of all of this. Like when you really can learn to read the book of nature, there's
Mm-hmm.
this inexhaustible source of power and strength that we have to help us persevere and kind of face the challenges of our day.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Well, thanks. If it's beautifully said, it's because I've been reading your book these last few days.
Well, you're kind.
And
You're very, very
yeah,
kind.
it's
So
very inspiring work. And so
thank you. Thank you.
we'll have to have you back on sometime after I'm sure you're going to be doing a whole round of press and stuff, but I'd love to chat with you more about this work as you keep tunneling away and finding
Tunneling
finding
away.
more
Well,
mysteries and astonishments.
it's just a complete honor and a blessing to begin this journey, this conversation by talking to you and the whole Yale Forum. I mean, that's what it's made me remember. Writers write books because it's a conversation across time, and I put my part of the conversation on the page and I turned it in over a year ago, and it's so exciting now as it begins to trickle out, and people are sending me, some people have gotten the book and they send me like sentences or passages that particularly stirred them, and so then a conversation begins about that. And you know you write books in solitude, but you wait for the communion that comes. And so thank you so much for opening the page and opening the conversation, and blessings to all of you and to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I can't think of a better note to conclude with. So yeah, thanks for your time, and thanks to everybody else for tuning in and listening or watching. And we'll be back again soon with some more conversations for you. And in the meantime, take care and be well.
Take care. Bye.